Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time in this first hour looking at a number of issues in the news. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. But also, I might just mention, as we always do, that we are broadcasting as well, not only on our own page, pointofview.net, but also on Facebook Live. If you'd like to leave a comment there, that is the case. And I might just mention, as a program note, that in the next hour, Jerry Tuma is going to be in studio, and I know by now some of you have maybe a pent-up set of questions you would like to ask when we look at the roller coaster stock market. We wonder about what some of these economic indicators look like. And so whether you have just a few dollars in the bank, or whether you have a very significant stock portfolio, whether you just have a 401k or a money market or something like that, I think you really want to join with our conversation there. And I recognize some of you would just as willingly leave a question on Facebook, which then I can read and save you from having to be on the phone the whole time. And so we're going to use that technology as well as we get into that. But let me just give you an overview of some of the things I want to talk about this first hour before we bring Jerry Tuma in studio. And that is, we have this shutdown, and it is really starting to affect what is happening at the airport. So our lead article here today from the Associated Press, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that because I know some of you maybe travel or will be traveling or going to an airport or pick up people at an airport. This has changed rather dramatically. I think, again, it's an attempt to try to force a resolution of this, and nothing wrong with TSA people if they're really sick from staying home. I could even understand some of them saying, I'm not getting a paycheck. I need to go find someplace to make some money right now, even if I just drive for Uber or Lyft or something like that. So, again, that shutdown has affected the airports. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll get back into, okay, why do we have the shutdown? And it's the question about the wall. My second article that I've posted there is one by Dennis Prager, so we'll get into that as well. A little bit later, we'll get into that third article, which deals with the whole issue of religious tests. That is written by our friend Lathan Watts. He's been on the program with us many times. But before we get to that, while we're talking about a shutdown, what I believe, I think I'm right on this, the largest teachers union in the country, 33,000 teachers in Los Angeles went on strike yesterday, and this I don't see resolving any quicker than the shutdown, because when you don't have money, you can't spend money. So we'll get into some of that as well. And then, of course, I have postponed this long enough. As you may be aware, if you've listened to other talk shows, the New York Times, of course, had a announcement that counterintelligence investigators had to consider whether the president's own actions considered a threat to national security, the whole question of whether or not the president was a Russian agent. I have trouble taking that seriously, but since the New York Times took it seriously, we'll have to take it seriously, and we'll do our best to try to sort some of that out. I'll give you some material that we will post, as we have posted, by Rich Lowry. And then our good friend Gary Bauer has some comments, and so that's more than enough to cover. But if not, I've got a couple of other issues I wanted to get into, and so we will see how far that takes us in the first hour. Then, as I mentioned, Jerry Tuma, who is a certified financial planner, and he's the president and founder of Cornerstone Financial, will come here and try to answer many of the questions you've been asking about this roller coaster stock market and about kind of the economic future of the United States, near term and long term. So all sorts of things to cover here today. But again, the first article, if you'd like to find it, it talks about the fact that the number of airport screeners and security screeners, that'd be TSA screeners, are starting to fail to show up to work. This national absence rate is now at 7.6% compared with about 3.2% on a comparable day just a year ago. Now, you can understand why that is the case. Some of them are saying, look, I didn't receive a paycheck. I still have to pay my rent. I still have to pay my car payment, whatever it might be. I still have to put food on the table for the family, whatever it might be. So a significant number of TSA agents just aren't showing up. Okay, what's that mean? Okay, if you're flying to Atlanta, Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the world's busiest airport, by the way, some passengers waited more than an hour to get through checkpoints, and I was noticing that they did not necessarily post their absentee figures, but one of the major carriers, probably the major carrier, obviously, if you've ever flown through Atlanta, is Delta. Delta Airlines actually said that they were advising passengers to get to the airport at least 2 hours before domestic flights and at least 3 hours before international flights. And so, again, the argument from the TSA said that they screened 1.9 million people on Sunday, looking at all the airports, obviously, and that 99.1% waited less than 30 minutes, 93% less than 15 minutes. So we'll see, but that seems to not necessarily be the case. And I recognize the way local media sometimes will bring a camera. There's no interest in showing no lines or short lines, so they're going to go to the one place where there are long lines. But that's Atlanta. Okay, we're broadcasting here in the state of Texas, as well as other places around the country, and at Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport, which, by the way, isn't staffed with as many TSA agents as, say, a hobby airport in Houston. But nevertheless, they decided to close down one of the terminals. That would be Terminal B, and that was closed over the weekend, and it will remain closed today. So that's something to think about. I know that some of you maybe have flown through the Miami International Airport. It's been a while since I've been there, but only about 6 months or so. And it also had to close one of its concourses for part of Saturday and Sunday. And evening flights each day, they also had some of those closed so that, again, TSA would have enough workers to work some of the screening that was taking place there. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what is happening nationwide. And the question that, of course, people are asking is, are there others that are going to be walking off the job? Because it is one thing to have to wait a little bit longer to go through a TSA screening line. But again, imagine if you are an air traffic controller, and the chairman of our Deacons Board right now is one of those air traffic controllers. He's been showing up every day, but you can imagine if some of them say, you know, this is just getting too difficult. Maybe I just need to go home. I am getting no pay for a high-stress job. And by the way, one of the more high-stress jobs out there is an air traffic controller. If just a few of them don't show up, you are talking about having to cancel just flights and changing a lot of things. So the shutdown, as we might have imagined, took a while for some of the negative aspects to surface, but those are beginning to surface in significant ways and will continue to do so because this is now, as I announced last Friday, going to be and now is the longest shutdown in the history of the federal government. So when we come back from the break, I want to talk a little bit about some of those arguments about the wall and whether those arguments make any sense. And Dennis Prager puts this in a broader context because he calls it the left, the wall, and the truth, in which he says, okay, near the end of his piece, he will answer the questions about some of the arguments. But he also points out that if people seriously believe some of those arguments, they probably are deluded. So we're going to get into that in some detail, and that comes up right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What if Christians and Christian institutions that provide so many social services went on strike? That is a question that Addison Del Mastro asked in The American Conservative. He reminds us of the book by Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. She proposes the question of what would happen if entrepreneurs in America decided to go on strike because of an increasingly overbearing regulatory state. The book documents the dystopia the country falls into. While I doubt that Christians and Christian groups will ever go on strike, it is a great thought experiment. Addison Del Mastro explains that many of the services Americans take for granted are provided by churches and Christian organizations. One example is healthcare. John Stonestreet, in his Breakpoint commentary, wrote, "No Christianity, no hospitals. Don't take Christian contributions for granted." Catholic, Baptist, and Methodist hospitals can be found all over the country. He documented that in at least 30 communities, the Catholic hospital is the only hospital within a 35-mile radius. Education is another area where Christian involvement has been key. Christians run thousands of private schools that usually meet or exceed the quality of the public schools. The Catholic Church or various Protestant denominations or churches run more than 7 in 10 of the private schools in America. Churches also minister to the needy and marginalized in society. There are soup kitchens and outreaches to the poor and homeless. Churches also provide meals for the homebound. They provide marriage counseling as well as psychological counseling. Christian organizations place children in foster care and adoption, and Christian groups run pregnancy resource centers. You know, Christians aren't going on strike, but if they did, America would be a very different place indeed. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I already just mentioned a minute ago, but let me mention it again. We're going to have Jerry Tuma with us, and some of you might have some financial questions, and even though he is not in studio yet, you can certainly leave some of those questions on our Facebook page, and so that way I will already have some of those preloaded, so if there's something that's been on your mind, don't necessarily have to wait till 1 o'clock to ask that question. We will certainly have some of those on the Facebook page. And so if you have some comments or questions about investments, about the future of the economy, we're going to really be talking about the stock market in particular, and also the disconnect, if I can mention, between the stock market and the economy. Because if you look at the economy, okay, we got some problems. You know, obviously trade deficits soaring again with China. But apart from that, and maybe a few others, we have one of the best economies we've had in some time. Median family income, when adjusted for inflation, is higher than has ever been in our history. Unemployment is lower for certain groups, Hispanic American, African American, even for women, than it's ever been before. You have more jobs created than anybody would have ever imagined. We had, during the 8 years of President Obama's administration, we lost about 200,000 plus manufacturing jobs. In just these 2 years under the Trump administration, we've increased manufacturing jobs about 400,000 plus. I'll give you the exact numbers when we get into it. There are a lot of positives that are happening right now, and yet the stock market is all over the map. Now, some of that has to do with the Federal Reserve. Some of it has to do with the tweets by the president. Let's, give blame where blame is due. That some of it has to do with the tariff wars, which, again, I think falls on the shoulders of the president. So, there's a lot of reasons, but you wouldn't think that you'd have such a volatile stock market at a time when there is so much good news. So we'll get into some of that with him. Maybe you have some questions about investments or about the economy, and we certainly will welcome those phone calls, as well as some of the comments that you might want to post on our Facebook page. But let me get into this piece by Dennis Prager. It just seemed like it was an appropriate one to talk about because he puts this whole conflict about the wall in a little broader context. So I'm going to read most of it. It is the second article we've posted today, and so I would encourage you to print it out, maybe post it on your Facebook page, start a conversation with some people, because there's just a lot of great material, even in a short column that he has written. And that is, first of all, he says Democrats and others on the left offer 3 reasons for their opposition to building a wall on America's southern border. Number 1, a wall is ineffective. Number 2, a wall is too expensive. Number 3, a wall is immoral. And if you have not heard those arguments, you haven't been listening to Point of View, because we've mentioned them many times, and we sort of took some of them to task last Friday on our weekend edition. But Dennis Prager goes on to say, each one of these is false, so false to constitute lies. So the only question is, do Democrats and others of the left believe these lies? And he said, this question really has plagued me all my life, because he says leftism is based upon lies. Now, he makes a distinction, by the way, and we have on this program, between liberalism, because a liberal would honestly say, look, we may disagree, but I defend your right to hold to those particular views, even though I would disagree with those. The left say you have no right to hold to those views, and your belief on those views actually discounts and eliminates you from a serious discussion. So he's making a distinction there. But anyway, he goes on to ask a couple of questions before he responds to the arguments about the wall. He says, did my left-wing professors at Columbia University really believe the United States and the Soviet Union were equally responsible for the Cold War? I remember hearing that, and for those of you that are younger, this may not be something you remember because it was not part of your conscious experience, but it certainly was for those of that were older. And he said, did they really believe that one of the most genocidal regimes in history, which butchered tens of millions its own people, starved as many as 4 million Ukrainians, enslaved 7 Eastern European countries under totalitarian rule, and created the monstrous North Korean communist regime, was no more responsible for the Cold War than the United States, the freest country in human history? So that was one of the questions he had. Another question he had was, did my left-wing professors really believe men and women are the same except for body parts? And he goes into some things I won't mention since it's a family program, but you can recognize the body parts are different. The X chromosome and Y chromosome are different. I'll leave it at that. Do leftists really believe that American universities constitute rape cultures? If so, why does the left-wing parent send his or her child to college? Would you send your daughter to a place you believe was permeated by rape? That's a good question. If indeed you believe that's what it is, why did you send your child or grandchild there? Another one, do leftists really believe the statement there is only one race, the human race? Or do they believe that that's a racist statement because that's the official position of the University of California? Or do leftists really believe that virtually every criticism of former President Barack Obama emanated from racism, that all opposition to lowering college admission standards for blacks is racist, and that attacks on George Soros are anti-Semitic? And the point is he has this series of questions, and at the end he says, if leftists believe any of the above, let alone all of it, they are deluded people. And the existence of tens of millions of deluded people in a society can only portend catastrophe, he says. If leftists do not believe these claims, they are not deluded, but they lie for effect and therefore engage in evil. And the existence of tens of millions of people consciously committed to lying means society has little hope as well. So he says, now let's get to the wall. Let's deal with each one of those. But again, he sort of put this in context. This isn't the first time we've had people make statements which, if you believe it, mean you're not living in reality, or if they don't believe it, mean that they're deceiving you in order to achieve some kind of goal. So the first one, too expensive. Do leftists believe a country cannot afford $5.7 billion? As Democrats have approved $1.3 billion for border security, the difference is about 0.1% of the federal spending, which is $4.5 trillion, as we've talked about. Democrats and the rest of the left make this argument. They are the very people who, for more than half a century, have successfully pushed for an unprecedented expansion of government spending. The very people who are overwhelmingly responsible for local, state, and federal government debts of such magnitude that they cannot be paid without massive decreases in spending and the likely social disruption that will entail. If not possible, these people believe America cannot afford to pay for a wall, then they are lying when they claim that the price tag is too high. And an example, which I might use later in the national hour and the third hour when we get together, is what's happening in California right now. Because if you've not paid attention, in the state of California, the Assembly and the Senate in the California legislature is dominated by Democrats. Matter of fact, a veto-proof group right now with the Democrat governor. And they've allocated, are you ready for this number? $77 billion. Not $5 billion, $77 billion to pay for a high-speed train between San Francisco and Los Angeles that will be ready possibly in the year 2033 at the earliest. And it will undoubtedly rise to more than $100 billion, given the fact that every estimate that you've ever seen for infrastructure almost always is too low. And thanks, he says, to the left and Democrats, California is spending this money despite having an estimated $2 trillion in debt. And if you'd like to see some of the documentation for that, I did a commentary a while back where we talked about if you look at the debt in the state of California and then the unfunded pensions, we are talking about $2 trillion for a state, which is huge. And so, again, just illustrates one of those arguments. But I want to take a break, and when we come back, we'll take the other two arguments, whether or not a steel wall, steel barrier, concrete wall would be ineffective, and then, most importantly, whether it would be immoral. But at least we've tried to respond briefly to the first one, and that is a wall is too expensive. It is hard to take that seriously, but nevertheless, a good illustration of nothing else, why we should really begin to challenge some of those arguments. As we go to a break, let me just mention we've got a couple of resources that are available to you. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about unions going on strike. My commentary today is kind of a thought experiment. What if all Christians went on strike? It's not going to happen. It never will happen. Christians would never do that. But it's of interesting calculation of the kind of disruption that would happen because of so many Christian organizations, as well as churches, providing so many very significant services. And it's a good setup for the conversation we'll have a little bit later as we look at what is the third article on our website, and that is the whole question of Democratic senators who have now tried to apply a religious test. You're a Catholic. You believe in pro-life issues. Shouldn't that disqualify you from actually serving in the government or as a judge? And so we'll talk about how, in many cases, the secular society loves all the things the church and Christian organizations do. They just don't like the theology behind it. And so that's sometimes reason enough to say, what would happen if all the Christians were go on strike? We'll be back right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. 5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just wanted to finish off the second article that we have posted here today by Dennis Prager, and then move on to one that we did not post, although I think you'll certainly see the connection between this one that we're talking about and the one having to do with the unions in Los Angeles. And if nothing else, perhaps you can already see the natural connection. On the one hand, you have Democrats at the national level saying we cannot afford $5 billion. But Democrats in the state of California are saying we're going to allocate $77 billion. And again, that's just the number they're using. It's going to be $100 billion easy for a high-speed train that won't be available not in this decade, not in the next decade, but the decade after that. You get that? Again, and when they say it's going to be available in 2033, really? Do you really think that? I don't. But okay, 15 years from now, maybe. I'm really skeptical, but that's the case. So anyway, the first argument, of course, is the wall is too expensive, and it's just hard to take that seriously. It doesn't pass what I call the straight face test. Okay, the second argument is, and Dennis Prager takes that on, the left says a wall or a steel barrier would be ineffective at preventing illegal immigration. We know he doesn't believe this because, if nothing else, 5 years ago, the Speaker of the House at that time, Nancy Pelosi, back then, who was the minority leader, supported a bill that required the construction of about 700 miles of border fencing. And Senator Chuck Schumer was one of the so-called Gang of Eight. That would be 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats who supported 700 miles of fencing at the border. Every Senate Democrat voted for the Gang of Eight bill, including, of course, 36 Democrats who serve in the Senate today. And I gave you that list of some of those just the other day. So do Schumer and Pelosi and all other Democrats regard fencing as effective, but a wall as ineffective? And again, Dennis Prager asks, well, do Democrats deny that Israel's barrier has virtually ended Palestinian terrorism? Do they believe Turkey's just built 500-mile wall across its entire border with Syria will be ineffective? Most people are unaware of that. That is something we have never really taken the time to mention. Do they know about the effective walls and barriers between the Turkish and Greek-controlled areas in Cyprus, between Hungary and Serbia and Croatia, which I talked about on the program recently, Morocco and Algeria, India and Pakistan, and elsewhere? So he gives us this long list of places where walls and barriers and fencing have actually been very effective. As for the Democrats and others on the left declaring a wall immoral, it's difficult to know which is preferable, that they are living in delusion or lying. On what grounds is it immoral? They never say. Is there a Democrat or a leftist who regards walls or other physical barriers surrounding homes or communities as immoral? If you haven't seen the Facebook post of these activists that went over the barrier in the mansion that is owned by Nancy Pelosi and then did some kind of demonstration, you can see that obviously they have maybe not high walls, but they do have certain barriers that prevent people from driving in, and walls that you have to crawl over a little bit just to even get into the area outside of Nancy Pelosi's mansion. And again, he says one doubts it. For one thing, many of them live behind a physical barrier. Obviously, I just alluded to that, including the former president of the United States. So then why isn't a physical barrier that protects America equally moral? The only possible answers are that these people don't really regard America as their home, or they're lying about a wall being immoral. So why all the lies? And Dennis Prager ends with this. He says, because lies are effective in achieving left-wing goals. These are people in every political and social group that actually lie. And there are people within every one of those groups who are truth tellers, but, and this is a but, whose significance cannot be overstated. While truth is a liberal value and truth is a conservative value, truth has never been a leftist value. For the left, there is, if nothing else, always something more important. In this case, the humiliation of the President of the United States. And so, again, he makes a distinction between liberals and leftists, and that, I think, illustrates some of the points. While we're talking about California, I thought it would be good to at least mention that we are in a situation now where there are not only TSA members and workers and employees that are not showing up to the airports. You basically have kids out of school right now in Los Angeles because the LA Teachers Union went on strike. And here are some of the comments made by the United Teachers president, who said, here we are on a rainy day in the richest country in the world, in the richest state in the country, in a state as blue as it can be, in a city rife with millionaires where teachers have to go on strike. And so it does kind of get your attention when you realize that, after all, California has been in the past the golden state. But when you spend and spend and spend, sooner or later, the bill comes due. And so that is why yesterday and today and for the foreseeable future, 33,000 teachers in the Los Angeles Unified School District actually are on strike. And as our friends in the Wall Street Journal put it, as this Los Angeles Unified School District slouches towards insolvency due to unaffordable labor contracts, due to a very significant $1.8 billion reserve, the district is spending about $500 million more each year than its annual revenues and will be broke within 2 years, which could prompt the state takeover and bankruptcy. Now, let's put this in perspective. How much are the teachers getting paid? Los Angeles teachers earn on average about $75,000 per year, which is actually, if some of us say, well, it looks pretty good to me, that's actually $6,000 less than the statewide average. So if you were a teacher and you moved out of Los Angeles to other parts, especially Northern California, go to like Palo Alto, you would be making almost $90,000, certainly 81,000, whatever, depends on, where you are. And so again, the average teacher in Los Angeles, and I know nobody's average, some are higher, some are lower, but the average is $75,000 a year. Good job if you can get it. And then they also have compensation, which includes health and retirement benefits, which exceed then an actual payment to them. In other words, what does it cost to the school district to pay for each teacher? That ends up being about $110,000 because you have all the health and retirement benefits there as well. So you can kind of see that on the one hand, the teachers say, well, I'm not getting paid as much as other people in California. True. But you can also see why Los Angeles is saying, we just can't afford this. You can imagine, think about where you are right now if you were paying teachers $110,000. And, of course, that's the other issue because of the very significant housing costs in the Los Angeles area. Sometimes it's even harder to retain teachers, especially as more and more money is diverted to benefits and pensions. Now, the health benefits alone consume about 15% of the $16,000 or so the district spends per pupil. So again, they spend a lot of money per student sitting in the chair. And then, of course, there are some other benefits, not the least of which, if you're a teacher, you usually have the summer off, although some actually go to graduate school, but you can retire as early as the age of 55. As a person who is 12 years past that, looks pretty good. And they don't have to pay a dime for health insurance between age 55 and when they qualify for Medicare. So again, very generous benefits there as well. They also receive a subsidized supplemental coverage because when you do go on Medicare, then you get supplemental coverage. And so as a result, you can see why maybe some of the teachers say, well, look at what everybody else is getting when they're in Palo Alto or they're in Sacramento. Or even when they're in Bakersfield, they might be getting better than I in Los Angeles, and I have to pay more for housing. But you can also see why they're just going broke. There's just no way about it. And so now what you have, as it says in this article, school districts across the Golden State are scrounging to keep the lights on. Last year, San Francisco voters approved a $300 parcel tax on each home to fund schools. Sacramento's Unified District warns that it could go bankrupt this year, barring cuts to worker benefits. And the new governor, Gavin Newsom, his budget proposal last year would provide schools with a modest relief by making about $3 billion payment to the pension fund on their behalf. And yet, as one superintendent of the Los Angeles United Group actually had to say, that Unified School District, schools can't spend money they don't have. Welcome to the real world, teachers. And again, this strike is going to go on for some time. And it's just an illustration, again, that if you don't pay attention to how much money you're spending each year and you don't pay attention to pensions, what happened in California could happen in your state as well. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ed McDaniels was a local pastor in Upshur County, West Virginia. One day he asked the local school superintendent if he could place Bibles on a table in the local public school. He didn't want to hand students anything, he just wanted to set out the material as a resource the students could take if they wanted to. The school had a policy of allowing the local Little League, Boy and Girl Scouts, 4-H Club, and other community organizations to set their materials on a table. Students passing by could take the material or simply ignore it. In a separate policy, the school prevented the distribution of religious and political materials. Local residents sued the school system, claiming that the policy preventing distribution of religious materials also denied McDaniels access to the community information table. Eventually, the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit determined that distributing meant physically handing out materials. In fact, the court explained that if the school kept the Bibles off of the community information table, it would breach its duty of religious neutrality and, in the words of the court, evince the hostility toward religious speech that the Establishment Clause does not require and that the free exercise and free speech clauses forbid. So look around at your school. Perhaps there's a community information table waiting to be stocked with Bibles. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that Jerry Tuma will be in studio in just a few minutes, and so we're going to spend some time looking at what is happening in the stock market and in the economy. But before we do so, I thought I would just spend a few minutes, and I do mean just a few minutes, on the whole issue of whether or not the president was a Russian agent. I mean, again, it's hard to say that with a straight face, but if you look at the headlines in the New York Times, the actual report said counterintelligence investigators had to consider whether the president's own actions constituted a possible threat to national security. And so, in a sense, it is, as Rich Lowry points out in the third article, or I guess it'd be the fourth article we've posted here, that the FBI decided that it would take upon itself to determine whether the President of the United States is a threat to national security and whether or not he's even like a Russian agent. And anybody that's ever been around the president, I haven't, but I know people that have spent time saying this is just ludicrous, but that's how the New York Times reports those kinds of things. And so it's worth taking into effect what is actually happening. You can read through the piece that we've posted here, but the argument is that the FBI finally felt that they needed to act. And so Rich Lowry says if the New York Times reporting is correct, the FBI grew more suspicious of Donald Trump's conduct, first as candidate, then as president, and there were a couple of reasons for this. Reason number one was during the campaign, he urged the Russians to hack Hillary Clinton's email. Well, if you remember that, and I've been tempted to pull the clip and play it, but you know what it's talking about, where he was just having fun at the expense of some of the press. You know, anybody out there that's got those emails, we're still looking for those, and you could report them to the press. And it was obviously a joke. But if indeed people in the FBI don't understand what a joke is, well, maybe that's point number one. Point number two, according to this article, is the platform, the Republican platform, was allegedly softened towards Russia. Now, I love Rich Lowry, who says, never mind that, as Byron York of the Washington Examiner has demonstrated, this actually didn't happen. So that one isn't even true. And then they take on one other one, that the interview that Lester Holt did after the firing of Comey, that Donald Trump said this Russian thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. And, of course, the argument that sometimes Donald Trump would praise Vladimir Putin. And I like what Rich Lowry, who's certainly no fan of Donald Trump, said. These comments are blameworthy, but they're not a federal offense. And so how to think about some of this, because some people are making a big deal. There's an article today in USA Today by somebody who's saying, well, the president collected some of the notes after an interview he did with Vladimir Putin. I mean, that has never happened before. Are there possibly security issues involved in that, or maybe comments off the record that he didn't want other people to hear? We've heard a few comments that were made by the previous president, Barack Obama, when he did not realize a microphone was on. And so if that is the case, then we don't know. And that's part of the issue. Do I know whether or not the president was colluding with the Russians? No. Does anybody else know? Not as far I can tell. We do have a Mueller investigation. We can wait till they give us the report. But let me real quickly, before we run out of time, take some of this in a point-by-point manner. And Gary Bauer did the hard work, and I appreciate that, of in his Monday report, kind of summarizing Andrew McCarthy's analysis of the Times article. Then you've heard it from us, and you can evaluate it on your own. Here's what we know. The FBI had what was called the Steele dossier. That's that one with that fictitious story about the so-called golden showers and everything. Anyway, they had that back in 2016. They believed it. They came to the Bureau because it came from multiple sources: Bruce Orr, John McCain, Christopher Steele himself. Number two, they had plenty of reasons to be skeptical of it because Steele's intelligence had been suspected in the past. It was paid for by the Clinton campaign. And matter of fact, he was eventually fired for leaking that story, which eventually came out in things like the National Enquirer. Point number three, that even though James Comey admitted that the dossier was never fully vetted, the FBI used that to obtain what is called a FISA warrant to monitor Carter Page. So at the very beginning, there was questions about the investigation. The fourth point, as Andrew McCarthy points out, the FBI's real target in the FISA warrants was not Page, but Donald Trump. Of course it was. After all, the dossier wasn't about Page, it was about Trump. And the FBI would never have pursued the FISA warrants unless they believed the underlying allegations that Trump was colluding with the Russians. Number five, but Comey and others understood just how unprecedented and controversial an FBI investigation of the opposition's party's presidential candidate would be, so they deceived the FISA courts about the true nature and target of the investigation, saying the dossier had been verified when it had not been, and requested warrant for campaign aides, but really they were looking at the candidate, Donald Trump. Okay, the next point. Throughout the entire investigation in the Operation 2016, the FBI worked on the assumption that Trump was going to lose. So no harm, no foul, because Hillary Clinton would be president, and we've got that taken care of. Yet when Donald Trump won, that meant the Bureau had an even bigger problem. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, would soon learn that the FBI had been targeting him all along, and he would want to clean house at the FBI and the Justice Department, which, by the way, is what he's been doing over the last 2 years. The next point, so the Bureau continued to dissemble that this was really just a counterintelligence campaign to figure out how the Russians had meddled in the election, yet there continued to be strategic leaks to the media suggesting collusion with the Trump campaign and, by extension, the president himself. And then when the president eventually decided it was time to clean house by firing James Comey, deep state allies of the fired former director decided to strike back by triggering what? Of course, that's the investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller on the grounds that Comey's dismissal constituted an obstruction of justice. And during this entire time, it's important to remember that between the firing of James Comey and the appointment of Robert Mueller, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe had been discussing whether or not to be wearing a wire to secretly record the president, and even talked about invoking the 25th Amendment to remove the president. So that's kind of where we find ourselves with that particular story in the New York Times, and thought I'd give you a chance to read some of the material about that. We won't talk more about it because so much of it is speculation, but what we are finding out is there were some things happening to the FBI that shouldn't have happened, and let's hope they never happen again. I might just mention one of the other articles, which we haven't been able to get to, and we'll probably do that later in the third hour, has to do with this whole issue of religious test. The Constitution does not allow you to use a religious test for anybody that serves in government, and yet we are starting to see, starting with Dianne Feinstein, and then with Camilla Harris, and even Mazie Hirono, two from California, one from Hawaii, are starting to ask all sorts of questions of individuals that have a Catholic background. And as I've pointed out on this program before, if you're a Catholic and you don't believe what the Catholic Church teaches, no problem. We actually have a majority of people on the Supreme Court that are Catholic, but some of them raise no questions at all for the Democrats because they really don't believe the Catholic theology. But if they do, that is, in the minds of at least some of the Democratic senators, reason enough to eliminate them from serving in office. So we'll come back and talk about that issue in just a few minutes. Let me just mention, though, that if you would like to find some of the material we're going to be talking about today, first of all, we have information about Jerry Tuma and Cornerstone Financial. We also have the Cornerstone Report. And, of course, we have my commentary today, which asks a very good question. What if Christians were to go on strike, what would happen? A lot of services that people take for granted would vanish. Let's take a break. We got a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here. We're going to spend some time in this first hour here talking about your finances, but I might just mention that a little bit later we're going to get back into some of the issues in the news. A lot of TSA agents are not showing up, and this is causing certain airports to close down certain terminals, so that is our lead article there. We also have kind of the point counterpoint. What about the arguments saying that we can't afford the wall, or it's not effective, or it's immoral? That article is also posted. We've talked a little bit about some of the issues of whether or not a religious test has been implemented by some of these Democratic senators. So our friend Lathan Watts has written that piece, and then we'll maybe get into some of the FBI investigation, some of the front page and major headlines in the New York Times a little bit later. But many of you have said, since we've had Jerry Tuma on, things got really wild. I mean, the stock market already was going all over the place, but literally, when we were on the day before Christmas, Jerry, the stock market just boom, drops. The day after Christmas, boom, it blows back, and you can get vertigo by following the stock market. And so we're going to spend some time talking about what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the stock market. And again, he's going to give you some perspective, but also maybe some general advice. And again, Jerry Tuma is the founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services. It is a state-registered investment advisory firm in the Dallas area. But let's be honest, material on this program is intended for general information only and should not be taken as specific investment, tax, or legal advice. And that's because, guess what? As you have said so many times on the program, various people have certain goals, certain objectives, certain risk tolerance. That's going to vary for somebody who is 65 years of age and retiring, and it's going to be very different for a 25-year-old who's got the future. So, again, we'll certainly give you some general material, but also we have posted the Cornerstone report that we've talked about before, Preparing for the Top. You also have another market report we'll talk about a little bit later, but can you give us some perspective? Because as the economy seems to be doing very well, the stock market is all over the map, and people that have sent emails and things like that say, I don't even know what to do anymore. Give us at least a perspective on what's happening.
Okay. Well, Kerby, let's first of all kind of give a couple of economic definitions, if you want to call it that. The economy has been doing very well. It did great last year. The Republicans passed the tax reform. Corporate tax reform was badly needed. The small business optimism went through the roof. Matter of fact, I know you've read our book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond. We talked about solutions for the meltdown that we had. Now, this book's almost 10 years old. I guess it'll be 10 years old this summer. And the section preparing for the springtime demographically included Small Business Administration, boom there. Mm-hmm. Mainly all the things that we've been seeing the last 2 years, tax reforms, et cetera. So we've seen some really good things happen on what we call the structural side of the economy. Revising the corporate tax return, the deregulation has been massive under Trump. That's what the business owners needed. But we also have what we call a cyclical viewpoint, the business cycle. So any of you who've been in business schools, Economics 101 talks about the business cycle, expansions and contractions. And that's where we're facing things right now. The employment rate is a lagging indicator. So if you go back to essentially Milton Friedman time of economics, which I had as an undergraduate back in the 70s, I won't tell you what year exactly because I got enough gray hair already. But the point is real simple. If you're looking to see where's the economy going to go, a good analogy would be you want to follow the engine of the train, not the caboose. right? Wherever the engine goes, the rest of that train's going to follow.
Good line.
And so the issue here is really the unemployment rate or employment is the caboose on the train. It's a lagging indicator. It's reflecting what's been happening the last 6 months to a year. It's not reflecting what's going on in the future.
Good point.
On the other hand, the stock market tends to be a very strong leading indicator of the economy, and you know what's been happening with the stock market lately.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a good chance we put in a short-term bottom in Christmas Eve. I don't know that's going to necessarily hold for the year. I think good chance we go back and, quote, test the lows, meaning go back and try that low, see if it's going to hold between now and March, probably between now and February. I think corporate earnings are going to have a lot of challenges with the trade, with the Fed. Liquidity is the biggest issue, though, and that's one of the things that I've been real critical about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, of course, controls monetary policy. Mm-hmm. They control interest rates, and they've been raising the level of interest rates 9 times so far in this current economic expansion. And what they really want to do is kind of like Goldilocks and Three Bears. Not too hot, not too cold, just right in the middle. So if they raise interest rates too much, then they cause a recession. If they don't raise them enough, you have another speculative boom and excesses get out of whack. Their goal is to be right in the middle, and I think they've overcorrected this time. In other words, they've been raising rates, but the bigger factor is worse than that. I know you're familiar with this because we talked about it in our special report, Preparing for the Top, what we call quantitative tightening.
Mm-hmm.
They printed $4.5 trillion to bail us out of the worst recession since the Great Depression, and frankly, rightfully so. I apologize for being critical of government agencies, but a quasi-agency, if you will. But I was real critical of the Fed before they burst the bubble in the housing market and the subprimes. But once they blew things up, they did a whole lot better job than the Fed did in the 1930s of recovering it. So it's kind of like if you had I always use the analogy of the U.S. economy is like the giant bodybuilder out there, Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, for those of you that are a little older like me and Kerby, had a near-fatal heart attack, hit them with the paddles, get them back on their feet, get them recovered. Great. We've done a great job of that. It took a long time. It was a tough recovery, especially with the Obama regulations and all the things that the left did. They really went overboard on gross overregulation. Well, so now we've had this miraculous recovery. U.S. economy is the strongest in the world again. U.S. stock market's beating everybody in sight. So what does the Fed decide to do? We don't want to keep that anymore, so we're going to have 10 orderlies tackle Arnold, pin him down to the hospital bed, strap him in, and start taking blood out of his veins again. Well, I'm like, what? What? Why would you do that? The economy is finally recovering well. We're finally having strong growth. Small business is where you get the vast majority of job growth. Any textbook will tell you that 60-80% of the growth from jobs is from small businesses. So everything is going marvelously well. And the Fed, as they usually do every cycle, assassinates what's going on with the recession. So what's happening right now, I don't foresee a massive downturn in the economy like 2008 at all. I don't see that happening.
That's good.
I don't think there's anything systemic there. But you can have a mild economic downturn, which is what we had in 2000, 2001. Very mild. Almost didn't even qualify as a recession in 2001. And if 9/11 hadn't happened, it probably wouldn't have even been a recession. But we had a severe bear market for stocks. So you've got to understand the economy and the stock market are correlated about 80% of the time, but that 20% is a magical difference there. And right now I think we've entered a bear market for stocks, in my opinion. I don't think it's anywhere near over. I think we're going to have a lot more shakeups. Trade is still a big issue. I don't see that being resolved right away. The Fed has decided maybe they're going to back off if they need to. Good news, but I don't see them lowering rates. I don't see them reversing course. The old war saying is until they see the whites of their eyes kind of thing. So when they finally see enough economic weakness that they go, uh-oh, we've made a mistake here, because that's what the stock market's been telling. The stock market's been telling the Federal Reserve, you're making a bad mistake here, and we're finally going to shake you up enough to let you know that. But they are economists, and, one of the best economists in the country, Nobel Prize winner from Yale, documented every financial crisis since the 1930s. He said, how many times did the consensus of economists predict a recession?
0.
Answer is none. Nada. Goose egg. 0 times. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek. What good are economists anyway? So we'll talk more about that when we get back from the break, Kerby.
Take a break and be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What if Christians and Christian institutions that provide so many social services went on strike? That is a question that Addison Del Mastro asked in The American Conservative. He reminds us of the book by Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. She proposes the question of what would happen if entrepreneurs in America decided to go on strike because of an increasingly overbearing regulatory state. The book documents the dystopia the country falls into. While I doubt that Christians and Christian groups will ever go on strike, it is a great thought experiment. Addison De Mastro explains that many of the services Americans take for granted are provided by churches and Christian organizations. One example is health care. John Stonestreet, in his Breakpoint commentary, wrote, "No Christianity, no hospitals. Don't take Christian contributions for granted." Catholic, Baptist, and Methodist hospitals can be found all over the country. He documented that in at least 30 communities, the Catholic hospital is the only hospital within a 35-mile radius. Education is another area where Christian involvement has been key. Christians run thousands of private schools that usually meet or exceed the quality of the public schools. The Catholic Church or various Protestant denominations or churches run more than 7 in 10 of the private schools in America. Churches also minister to the needy and marginalized in society. There are soup kitchens and outreaches to the poor and homeless. Churches also provide meals for the homebound. They provide marriage counseling as well as psychological counseling. Christian organizations place children in foster care and adoption, and Christian groups run pregnancy resource centers. You know, Christians aren't going on strike, but if they did, America would be a very different place indeed. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Rose to have with us today in studio Jerry Tuma, president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. And I might just mention, if you've got a comment or question, you can certainly give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. But Jerry, one of the other things I've encouraged people to do when I've got my Facebook page open is we also broadcast on Facebook. Some of you might just want to type out your question because you're sitting here right now listening and saying, well, I just want to ask a question, but also don't want to be on hold the whole time. So if you've got some comments or questions, that is the case. And I know a lot of people right now are saying, okay, we've had this bull market. Now are we headed to a bear market? What's going to happen in the future? Some people say, well, I'm not in the stock market. Well, if you've got a 401k or you got a money market, yes, you are. And a variety of others are wondering, you know, maybe I'm going to buy a house. What about interest rates? All sorts of things. As the interest rates go up, that's another issue. And back to what you mentioned about the Fed, there was an old Federal Reserve chairman one time that said, just as the party gets going, we'll take away the punch bowl.
Right.
Well, that's to kind of cool the economy so it isn't too hot, isn't too cold. It's Goldilocks. There's a problem. I've talking to my barber the other day, and he was saying, you know, I was talking to this one individual that decided to wait a year to buy this house. He was trying to get enough money, living with his mom, and then just about the time he came to buy the house, the interest rates were twice what they were a year ago, and so he couldn't even buy his house. So that the rising interest rates, which are an attempt to kind of cool the economy, are really hurting some of the consumers too, aren't they?
Yes, and housing is kind of a leading edge of that. One of the economists that I follow real closely, the Bolio brothers, been very accurate. I'd say 95% accurate with their trends over a 5-year stretch, which is really outstanding.
Yes.
And housing, if you include housing and all the related issues, you know, appliances and furniture and everything that goes into buying houses, construction, et cetera, it represents about 15% of the economy. Now, that's not 50%, but 15 is meaningful. And when that thing starts going in the tank, it sometimes serves as what we call the old analogy of the canary in the coal mine for the economy. The housing market's kind of ticked over. Now, in the short run, the good news is that I think interest rates, at least on the longer term, interest rates have probably peaked for this cycle. Even though the Fed has been talking tough about raising rates and raising rates some more, they're starting to back off on that a little bit. They're going, okay, well, maybe we're a little too hot, not right in the middle like the Goldilocks analogy we used earlier. But the bottom line is I think that'll help housing some. I don't know it's going to help housing an enormous amount because now you got uncertainty involved. People, retail, for example, we had great retail sales through Black Friday, and then in December, retail sort of tanked. Macy's stock, for example, is down 18% in short order. Part of that's e-commerce type stuff, but it's basically everybody kind of started getting shook up with the market. Now, again, we have to understand in the bigger scheme of things, these things are cyclical. It's kind of like, well, in the wintertime, if it freezes enough, you kill some of the bugs off and you get a good benefit from that next summer, and you're glad that it happened. You have to have cleansing in the economy. If you don't, then the excesses of greed, speculation, and debt just get overwhelming. And at some point, you have a 2008 type of deal where the debt bubble becomes so high it causes a stupendous crash. Whereas if you cleansed it a little bit at a time along the way, you'd be much healthier in the long run. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking at it, like I said, as a severe downturn in the economy. Trade is definitely an issue. I don't see that one being resolved immediately or anytime soon. The way it's looking to me, China has their way of doing things, and there's going to be some negotiation and back and forth, and we'll give you a little of this and so forth. But I don't see a major resolution overnight. The Fed at least has pulled back a little bit on their stance in December. That's basically what tanked the market. The final thing that caused it to tank was the Fed not only said we're going to keep raising rates, but the quantitative tightening we talked about, where they're taking the $4.5 trillion out of the economy that they printed for the crash. They're taking out every $50 billion a month, and they said basically Powell said it's going to be on autopilot. We're not touching that. Well, he's kind of restated that a little bit because the market got his attention. But the bottom line is, if you look at the earmarks of bear markets, and again, Kerby, you know this, and I apologize if this sounds like boasting, but we've, by God's grace, been accurate on 3 out of the last 4. We weren't fully prepared for 2008. I don't know very many people that were. We didn't know where the subprimes were buried in the system. But the bottom line is this looks like a bear market to me. I do think there's a real good chance that we've hit a temporary low, and they'll probably have a bounce. There's going to be some sort of deal on trade. The government shutdown is actually biting right now. In the past, it's been mostly investment noise. It really hadn't been that relevant to anything. But now, okay, it's affecting...
Longest shutdown in history.
Yeah, it's affecting the airlines because of the FAA. It's affecting, the air
TSA. You got that.
It's affecting IRS. How are people going to get mortgages if they can't qualify for their tax returns, don't get processed correctly? So it's starting to bite in real terms, whereas usually it's just a big carnival show that blows off overnight. But I think the biggest factor is corporations are having to face the future going, wait a minute, there's a slowdown coming globally. The U.S., in my opinion, still is the strongest game in town. In other words, I feel like our economy will continue to be the strongest. Our markets will hold up much better. Boy, if you look at the markets in Europe, many of them haven't even recovered since 2008. Italy, Spain, a bunch of them. Even France and Germany barely recovered half since 2008.
Right.
So the good news is, from a longer-term perspective, America's sitting in really good shape. I think we're going to have a temporary shakeup this year in 2019. So again, you kind of got to contrast mild economic shakeup, if you will, call it that, most likely. But that doesn't mean it's a mild bear market for stocks. And I know people are different ages; they got different characteristics.
And again, I know you don't make up predictions, but let me at least crawl out on a limb a little bit, and you can agree or disagree. But if we have somebody listening that's a millennial, 20-something, 30-something, and you're saying, okay, maybe by the end or maybe even the middle part of this year, 2019, we might have a drop. And I'm 20 or 30, 25, 35, something like that, I might ride that out. But if I'm 65 or 67 or 68, and I might, think about putting them in cash or something like that. So there's a difference just in terms of the age and the long-term trajectory, isn't there?
Exactly. And people different. You can have people that are identical ages, identical amount of money, and their risk tolerances can be all over the board. So that's one reason we can't give what are called blanket recommendations. Can't say sell all stocks. I can tell you that I think we're in a bear market, and I think this is the first leg of it, and I think it'll probably get worse in the second half of the year, although I reserve the right to change my opinion later. Bottom line is everything economically is slowing down globally. It just hasn't shown up in the U.S. data yet because it's so recent. The stock market crash, if you want to call it a crash, if you will, really didn't get going until November, December, most of it in December. The second worst December ever in history after 1931, and that was back in the bad days. So the point is this, we encourage people, and Kerby, you're looking at a market update I sent out to all of the people on our database, and I said I would look at this through the lenses of opportunity. How can you do that? And again, someone that's 25 that's putting all their money in the 401k, they're going to have a different outlook than someone who's 55, 65, who's in retirement and they've accumulated a lot of money, kind of like, let's hope the millionaire next door type people. And it's a big deal if they have another 50% crash in the market. So we said opportunity arises in three different ways, one of which is probably too complicated to get on today's show, because there are things known as inverse funds that you can use, which are highly technical. We don't recommend people try that on their own. You can sit in cash or money market. I'm not making a recommendation what to do. I'm just giving you some ideas for opportunity until the storm's over. Buy low and sell where? High. Or, I think there'll be a buy low opportunity coming.
I think you're right.
In the next 12 months-ish. Don't know the exact timing. High quality bonds, which are going to do well in this kind of environment, probably. In the long run, I think inflation is going to be the big deal, but in the short run, it may be prudent for some people to go to a more safe type of account. So that's essentially what we think is happening here. The Dow went down like 18.99% from the top, so it's supposedly not an official bear market, but NASDAQ was down 26, the small caps were down 28. All of the indexes except the Dow just about cracked that 20% barrier, which is an artificial way to put it together anyway for Wall Street. So I would just encourage people, A, don't get depressed. B, realize fluctuations are going to happen. Kind of like in Ecclesiastes, there's a time to laugh, time to cry, time to plant, time to harvest. There's a time to buy and time to sell, in my view, in the market. And this might be one of those.
And let me just mention that one of the things we have posted for those of you watching online is the Cornerstone Report, but that one came out in July. And, of course, found that really everything you predicted is still happening, so it's good. But as people go to your website, Cornerstone Financial, I just got this from you just a few minutes ago, so that's the latest market update. So I would encourage people that, obviously they can go to our website, pointofview.net, and find some of that material. But that's from months ago. If they want updates or wanted to talk to you individually, they can go to cornerstonereport.com. Of course, I have a phone number there and an email and all the rest, and I would encourage you to do so. But at the same time, I want to give some of you a chance to ask some questions. So we have talked about the fact that the jobs report in December was really good, 312,000 new jobs and 58,000 additional jobs for October and November that were rotated up. So the economy's doing pretty well, but stock market might be heading down in the future. That's just a guess. And maybe you have some questions about buying a house, about your investments, about your 401k. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Jerry Tuma in studio with us today, a certified financial planner, president, and founder of Cornerstone Financial. Let me just mention, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take one of those calls in just a minute. But I know some of you might say, well, I would just as likely like to type my question out. So again, we broadcast on Facebook Live, so you can simply go to Point of View Radio Talk Show, and you can watch the program there, but also leave your question. We'll ask that one as well. Again, we'll have to give general answers to some of those questions. Now, some of them look like they're going to require some specific answers, and we can certainly give those as well. But if you want more information, of course, we have a link to cornerstonereport.com. Let's head out to Georgia first in the Good News Network. Jonathan, you're on with Jerry Tuma. What's your question?
Hey, guys. Hope y'all had a happy new year.
Thank you.
I have two questions, kind of similar, or they at least go along on the same idea. First question would be, do you recommend a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA? And the follow-up question would be, do you recommend index funds, or and if so, do you recommend like a total stock market, or maybe a bond or a bond market, real broad, general? Or what's your recommendation on that? I'll hang up and listen to your question.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And two very good questions. One, of course, of the difference between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, and then index funds. That'll take us a few minutes, so let's see if we can sort some of that out for all of our listeners.
Sounds good. On the IRA section, normally speaking, now this will be dependent upon, there are limits that the government puts on in terms of deductibility based on the amount of income you have, and I don't have that right off the top of my head. But the bottom line is, in the longer run, I think Roths are probably preferable. Reason is for this: if you look at the very long run and what's going on with the government entitlements and the government spending, we've gone from $7 trillion in national debt with George W. Bush to $21 trillion now, and the government's running over $1 trillion deficit every year right now, and it's going to continue to accelerate because, as Kerby knows, because he's written a book on demographics, as I did on the baby boomers, ours was called From Boom to Bust and Beyond, it's a runaway freight train on the entitlements. So Roths have the advantage of being tax-free in terms of their compounding. A traditional IRA, and I'm not saying you should dump traditional IRAs, I'm just saying if I had the choice of the two with a blank sheet of paper and I'm starting from scratch,
right,
the Roths, in my opinion, are superior because they allow for tax-free compounding. The IRAs, on the other hand, when you finally do have to pull money out when you get into retirement, you do have to pay tax on that.
Right.
The government forces you to take money out a little bit at a time once you hit age 70 and a half. So of the two, and of course we don't know Jonathan's age, but I'm just saying if I had one or the other choice and I was looking at which one I think in the long run is the better tool, I think the Roths will be, simply because, again, who knows? Now, of course, the government could come along and pass any kind of wacko bill if you get a socialist in there, literally. I mean, during the 2009 crash-ish, 2009-10, I don't remember which Republican or which Democrat, it wasn't a Republican, which Democrat actually tried to pass this, but there was a bill floated in Congress back then to mandate that all private savings accounts like IRA become a part of the Social Security system. Roll your IRAs and your retirement accounts into Social Security, and that would save Social Security. Of course, that's socialism. That's communism almost, if you will. I guess it's
and that was
not much
endorsed
difference.
by the current Speaker of the House. Back then, she endorsed
Good
that. So
grief, Kerby.
so that shows you that even if it's not an agenda item at the moment, it could be.
It could be in the worst case scenario type crisis. Now, I think you'd have, lynchings and almost burning at the stake on that if that were to ever happen. But the bottom line is, in my view, if I had a blank sheet of paper, I'd think the Roth would be the better route. In terms of index funds, I cannot make a blanket recommendation on that either. But the bottom line is what you're talking about there. Index funds are designed to capture the market action. So in other words, they're designed, a lot of them, Vanguard and a few of these other firms have low fees. Fidelity's trying to compete with them on that now. But they're basically trying to say, just put your money in the market, put a little bit of money in every month is the general way. We call it dollar cost averaging. Buy low-cost stuff and just keep it going for a very, very long time. So Jonathan sounded like He was a little bit younger, might be in his 30s, might be 40s, I don't know. But the bottom line is you're going to ride the roller coaster. It is a good way to accumulate wealth, assuming the long run holds up and the market keeps rolling up in the long run for that whole scenario. But I can't really make a specific recommendation on that.
Let me, if I can, for just a minute, talk about the difference that you have in terms of managing funds compared to many of the others.
Okay.
And that is, we've talked about this before, but I want people to just think about whether or not they want to get some other advice from people like you, because the argument that is oftentimes made is, well, you're going to get some roller coasters, but eventually the stock market always goes up. So you can ride the market even when it goes down. Eventually, like a roller coaster, will come back up again. And if you're 20-something, yeah, maybe that works. But there is a reason in some cases why they don't suggest that you sell the stocks, because if an individual's getting some kind of benefit, some kind of service payment for that, then that is certainly one issue. The other is some of these big firms, if they told everybody to sell their stock, that almost itself could begin to drop the market. So
absolutely,
sometimes you have to say, when I'm getting advice from individuals, what is their particular benefit or drawback? And one of the things I appreciate about you is you've been willing to look at this from a Christian point of view and also just an objective point of view, and you're sort of a contrarian. When everybody says go left, you say, no, I think it's time to go right, because we know what's going to happen next, right?
Yes, and again, that being a contrarian is all about the major turning points. In other words, in the middle, the majority is usually right. But at the turning points, which I think we've hit now, the majority's wrong, and that's just the way it always works with supply and demand. John Templeton was one of the luminaries in our industry, and he said it this way. He said, if I go to 10 engineers and 9 of the 10 tell me to build a bridge a certain way, I better listen to the 9. If I go to 10 doctors and 9 of the 10 tell me to treat my symptoms a certain way, I better listen to the 9. But if I go to 10 stockbrokers and they tell me to buy, 9 of the 10 tell me to buy, I better sell. So it's just, you reach a point of what we call the point of maximum optimism, which is where we were last year in the summer. Now, in terms of how the industry is compensated, these people get fees for keeping their, quote, assets under management. So they're incentivized to hold on to your money and not let it loose even in a bear market. Buy and hold type deal. But again, there's also a constitutional, not constitutional as in the U.S. Constitution, but basically, as you said, the bigger the firms are, if they were to give an outright sell signal, they say, okay, we don't believe that, we think the market's going to go into a bear market next year, their force alone would bury the market. It would, you would crash and just crash. And so it's just, they're never going to do that.
Yeah.
So the theme is always just hold on for the long run, just continue to buy and hold, put more money in. And there's conditions when that works. In other words, again, if you're younger, if you're putting money in every month, that's a different story than somebody, let's say, who's over 60 who says, if we have another 50% crash, I don't know that I want to ride that out again.
For sure.
People can have heart attacks and die with that kind of stress sometimes when they've accumulated all their money for their whole life. That's a different way of looking at the world, in my opinion. So our firm is really earmarked more toward the older folks that don't want to lose all their money or maybe make money when the market's going down. That's essentially how we are, kind of the Warren Buffett rule. First rule is don't lose your money, and second rule is remember the first rule.
That's right.
So.
Well, and as we go to a break, let's, if we can, when we come back, talk about this, because some people might say, well, if you're talking about moving it to cash, I might be able to do that. If you're talking about going into the bond market, I'm going, I have no idea what that is. Or we just had a question, of course, about the IRAs and index funds and things like that. Are you available off the air to give more specific advice? Because I think some people are saying, okay, I appreciate the general stuff, but I have a unique set of circumstances. I inherited this money from my family, or I just received a payment that I didn't expect, or I was bought out, or I've had all this money in this stock, and I wonder if that makes sense. They would love to get some kind of feedback, and you can give that to them off air, right?
Yes. Is okay if I give the 800 number?
Do that.
Yeah. Our number is 800-327-4285, 1-800-327-4285. 4285.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, let a few more of you ask a question if you would like to do so. We did this because some of you said, well, what do we do now with this stock market roller coaster? And again, I think you've already received some material. We do have this Cornerstone report that came out last July, but I think everything in it still makes a great deal of sense. But I might encourage you to contact Cornerstone Report because I, for example, just today got your latest special edition. And so that's really helpful to get an update and some other suggestions. We'll come back and talk about one or two of your suggestions. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You can also leave some questions on our Facebook Live post. And if you find yourself saying, well, I just probably need to get some advice off air, that is possible. And on our website, pointofview.net, we have a link to the cornerstonereport.com as well. So lots of resources posted quite a bit, and we'll take a few more questions, phone calls, and discussion, and then we'll get into some of the issues in the news in the next hour. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ed McDaniels was a local pastor in Upshur County, West Virginia. One day he asked the local school superintendent if he could place Bibles on a table in the local public school. He didn't want to hand students anything. He just wanted to set out the material as a resource the students could take if they wanted to. The school had a policy of allowing the local Little League, Boy and Girl Scouts, 4-H Club, and other community organizations to set their materials on a table. Students passing by could take the material or simply ignore it. In a separate policy, the school prevented the distribution of religious and political materials. Local residents sued the school system, claiming that the policy preventing distribution of religious materials also denied McDaniels access to the community information table. Eventually, the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit determined that distributing meant physically handing out materials. In fact, the court explained that if the school kept the Bibles off of the community information table, it would breach its duty of religious neutrality and, in the words of the court, evince the hostility toward religious speech that the Establishment Clause does not require and that the Free Exercise and Free Speech Clauses forbid. So look around at your school. Perhaps there's a community information table waiting to be stocked with Bibles. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that if you want to get the Cornerstone report that's 6 months old, we still have that on the website. Put it in your computer, maybe print it out. Let me just warn you, it's 14 pages long. And if you have a color printer, you might want to make sure you have enough ink there because that helps you understand some of the graphs. But some of the newer material, of course, you can get by contacting Cornerstone. But let's take some phone calls. We'll go back to the phones. And Bill, I think you are talking about investing in a 401k. So what's your question for Jerry Tuma?
Well,
this will be my first opportunity to work for a company that has a 401k, the VA or their version of the 401k, and they have great benefits package. Previously, my employer had lost our insurance due to couldn't afford the premiums back a few years ago, and so I really don't understand how trustworthy this 401k is and how much I should put in. It's up to 5%. I'm sure he's familiar with the package there with the Veterans Administration, but is that money going to be there if I put money in? I'm just not very familiar with. I'm 47 years old, and looking to stay here for a long term, and just looking for advice on should I put the maximum in, which is 5%. They have a limited option of what you can put it in. Just looking for advice.
All right.
Very good.
Well, Bill, I give it my best shot. And again, there's certain restrictions on things I can and can't do. The point of the 401k essentially, and I don't know the specifics on the VA's program, what the matching is, but typically what happens with the 401k is that it allows you to accumulate savings in one form or another. It could be a fixed account. It could be a bond account. It could be a stock-related account, and they'll have limited options, but they'll at least have some relatively good options for you to put money into. Typically, most employers match part of that contribution. So if you put in 5%, maybe they put in 3%. The goal is to get people saving, and that's a good goal because the market right now is on a roller coaster. But again, when you're young and you're starting out, and again, I can't give this is not advice per se, this is just education if you want to call it that. What typically happens is if let's say we do have a bear market in the next continuation, we'll call it, of this bear market over the next year, as the market goes down and you're putting more money in, you're buying shares of the market at lower and lower prices. Assuming that it does turn around, which I believe it will for the long run, then you've accumulated shares. So maybe it goes down from $10 a share to $8 a share to $7 a share. You're buying more shares every time the market drops a little bit, as long as you have a long-term outlook, and you're not going to need the money right away. Again, that's in contrast to someone who's retired or near retirement. So it goes down to 7, and then, of course, the next thing you know, a couple, 3 years out, we're back in a new bull market, and maybe it's up to 12 at that point. So that's really how these things are designed. I can't comment on the specifics of what is in that 401k, but that's essentially what they're trying to do. And so they incentivize you by adding money, by contributing and matching. So it's not something I would think it's not going to go bust. You don't have to worry about it going bankrupt or something like that.
He was wondering about safety. I think if anything's safe, it's a 401k tied to the federal government. What do you think?
Well, it's probably so, yes, in terms of not losing it, the benefits and so forth. So it's not going to go bankrupt. And these are segregated accounts anyway. Even if a company went bankrupt, as long as they're making the contributions 401k the way they're supposed to, that money is segregated from the general account of the company.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about it, quote, going bankrupt in this case. You just want to keep having them match your dollars, assuming you can put that money away and continue to put it away for the long run.
One of the advantages of an IRA or 401k is people will say, well, I could save on my own. Well, are you, first of all?
Right.
And the bottom line is that you look at most people's savings account and they are not able to save. Number two, in the case of this, as Bill's talking about, you're getting it matched. So you put your 5% in and you get, let's say you use the 3%, so whatever it might be, and all of a sudden you got 8% that you didn't have before. So there's real incentive to save. And I think it brings us back to a statistic you and I've seen before, and that is a number of years ago, the Federal Reserve asked this question of most Americans, and that is, if you had a $400 unexpected expense, could you cover it? And the answer for almost a majority of Americans was, no, I'd either have to put it on a credit card or I'd have to sell something.
Yes.
So most people aren't saving, and any savings, and this is, I think, very secure savings, is a good thing, and that's just kind of a basic biblical principle, isn't it?
Proverbs talks about go to the ant, you sluggard. He has no overseer, but you've never seen an ant take a watermelon and stick it down the hole. Ants are going to save little by little, and so that's the issue. Wealth hastily gotten will dwindle like the lottery winners. He who gathers it little by little will increase it, is another proverb. So the issue here is saving for the long run. The classic book written on this called The Millionaire Next Door that came after our first book on personal finance, smart money, essentially talks about that. You have wealth accumulators And typically they're people, they don't look like millionaires. They're ordinary looking people. They've just saved a little bit at a time for a very long stretch of time. That to me is the best way to do it.
And again, and I'll take another call in just a minute, but for our younger millennials out there, we found that if you were to just set aside $1,000 a year at the age of 25, and then even stop by the time you're 45,
Right.
you would do better than if you started, in the case of Bill, at the age of 47 and did it for 20 years,
True.
from 47 to 67. So
yeah, one of the
that is the
tragedies,
case.
Social Security Department has told us that about a third of all people that get Social Security, that's virtually all of their retirement income. And another third, it's at least 2/3 of their retirement income.
Let me take at least one more phone call. Rosalind in California, you're on with Jerry Tuma. Thank you for calling today.
Yes, I have a question. I am 64 years old and I am retired, and I have approximately $258,000 in there, and I believe Fidelity does, manage it, and they diversified it, and a lot of it goes in bonds when things are going crazy. Is that good?
Well, is that good? That's a hard question to quantify there. The fact, again, you're giving me some real vague understanding. I know the Fidelity, I know the diversified, I know part of the money in bonds is probably a age-targeted type of fund would be my guess, and saying, okay, if you're retiring in 20 whatever, they'll match a certain amount of money in bonds and a certain amount of stocks. The bond part right now serves as kind of your parachute. So in other words, if the market goes down more, which I believe it will, probably not till the second half of the year, maybe in the first half of the year. We just don't really know. The job of the bonds is to serve like a shock absorber or parachute. In other words, it's designed to cushion the stock market part of the fluctuation. In the long run, the goal is to get the growth out of the stock market. So beyond that, I can't give you much more information. If this is one of those deals, if you wanted to call us off the air, you could. But the bottom line is it's better than having all of your money in the market right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm thinking that we still have some other phone calls. Can you stay just a little bit longer?
Yes.
I'll prevail upon your good graces here since we have some. So some of you have been waiting until the very end to make your phone calls, which is always the case here. If you call in right now or in the next couple of minutes, we'll put you on hold. And as soon as we come back from the break, Jerry can try to answer some of those other questions and talk a little bit more about some of the resources, because in Rosalind's case, she could talk to you. There's no obligation, right? And she could give you some more detail, and you could say that. And again, she sounds like she's retired, so she may be saying, well, if you really are saying there's a bear market out there, might really want to rethink some of that.
Yeah, and in our view, there may be a better way than that, but that's not something I can explain over the air.
I understand that, too. Okay, I'll keep him here a little bit longer, and he's gracious enough to stay and to answer a few more questions. So let's give those of you that have any questions a chance to get online, and we'll queue those up after the break. If you would like to also maybe go to our Facebook Live page and write one out, we'll see if we can try to respond to some of those as well. And again, we're just trying to give you some general information, but again, if you want to talk to him off air, he's awful gracious to do that, and that's kind of what your job is. So we will take a break, then we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. We've got a lot to cover. The wall, the shutdown, oh my gosh, we've got lots to cover, but we'll certainly try to answer some of your financial questions right after these important messages.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation with Jerry Tuma for a little bit longer. He was willing to stay here. Again, founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services. And as we've mentioned before, material on this program is intended more kind of for general information, should not be taken as specific investment advice. And just a minute ago, we were talking with Rosalind in California. Rosalind, I thought I'd come back to you for just a minute, because when you're retired, you're in a different situation than, say, one of our other callers who seemed like he was probably a little bit younger, because the idea of holding your stocks or holding your investment and riding out a bear market is probably less attractive to you than somebody that's in their 20s. Does that make sense?
Yes, Yes, I understand that.
And so, Jerry, again, one of the questions I think you would want to ask, if you are of a certain age or you have a very low risk tolerance, you're going to want to really reevaluate a lot more. And I'll use Rosalind as a good example. I'm close to her age as well. I didn't pay attention a whole lot when I was in my 20s, because you could ride the roller coaster.
Right.
When you're in your 60s and 70s, you have to pay a lot more attention, because this idea of hold it until it comes back again, we saw in 2008 what that looked like, didn't we?
We did, and it takes many years. That's one of the downfalls, in my view, of the traditional buy and hold strategy. Right. And it's I have a hard time finding that in the Bible anywhere, frankly. You know, so you look at Ecclesiastes, talks about there's seasons, there's cycles. It's time to laugh, time to cry, time to plant, time to harvest. In my view, there's a time to buy and a time to sell, depending, again, on your age, risk tolerance, and all the other factors we got to throw in there. Jesus talked about the parable of the talents. He talked about the guys traded with the assets. Now, a company like Fidelity, it's a good company in terms of the reputation long term. They will do some trading, but basically the theme that most of these people use is hold on forever to these kind of things. Now, again, with the account, the way you described it earlier, Rosalind, they will have bonds for a portion of it. I don't know what percentage, because I don't know any specifics on which fund you're in. But the bonds, again, are designed to cushion the downturn on the market. So the market, again, the Dow and the S&P were down roughly 20% from the top when the top hit. A lot of the more aggressive stuff's down more than that. But the problem is I don't think that the storm is over yet in the market. So one of the analogies I use is, okay, if you were on a cruise ship, and I don't know, I like going on cruises. My wife likes going on cruises. You throw your luggage in the corner and you don't have to worry about moving again. The bottom line is that I were on a cruise ship, and I heard the captain get on the loudspeaker and said, "Hey, folks, well, we're going to have a storm." But the good news is that storms always blow over in the long run, and so therefore, even though this is a Class 5 hurricane, just hold tight, and we're going to ride it out. That's essentially the theme that the big giant institutions have, whereas you don't have to be like a cruise ship and try to ride every storm out. It might be prudent to get on the other side of an island somewhere and just don't get the gale force of the hurricane, if you will. Our view, on the other hand, is there are ways that we believe are better than that, where you can make money in down markets. You can at least avoid big losses if this gets worse. Now, it's speculative at this point whether it's going to get worse. My firm conviction is it will get worse this year. It might have hit the apex. It might have hit a turning point in December, probably did. But we'll see if that holds in the next couple of months. There's a lot of trade issues, a lot of earnings problems that corporations are going to have. So the outlook's worsening. The economics are softening across the board, especially overseas. And I just think the storm's not over yet.
And you mentioned Ecclesiastes, time to buy and to sell. But also Ecclesiastes 11, invest in 7 ventures, yes, and 8, because you do not know what disaster may come upon the land.
Exactly.
And so there we recognize that diversity is another biblical principle.
Absolutely.
This old idea that I'll put all my eggs in one basket and watch that basket was a really bad idea. So diversity is a good thing, right?
It is. Yes,
Yeah.
that's a biblical principle as well.
Let's take some other phone calls real quickly, and we'll go to Ken, listening on the Good News Network. Ken, what is your question here for Jerry Tuma?
Hi, I was just calling with a comment about the ABLE accounts. I figure a lot of people don't know about that, so if they have pen and paper, they can write it down. Or it's for people with disabilities that started where the onset of the disability was by the age of 26 or before the age of 26.
Okay.
And here in Georgia, the website is georgiastable.com. There's also stableaccount.com. And anyway, the deal on that is it's very similar to a savings account, even similar to a retirement account, but for people that have a disability that started before the age of 26, I believe it is.
Okay.
And you can put a maximum annual contribution of $14,000 in it if you have any money to put in it. And the purpose for the account limit is $445,000. It would take a very long time to put that in there, and it's an alternative to trust fund accounts for people with disabilities. And the reason for them coming up with that, and it's already been enacted into law. It was House Bill 768 and Senate. I think it was House Bill 768 and 710. Anyway, it was signed into law May the 3rd, 2016.
Sure. And again, I think we want people to maybe find out a little bit more if they have disabilities. So that's another one of those investment structures. But these instruments are out there, and some people might just say, how do I know about all those? I think that's a good reason to chat with you, because you may know about a lot more of those instruments than the average person, right?
Yeah, you would hope so.
Let's, if we can, just before we let you go, because I kept you a little bit longer so we could try to respond to a couple more questions, talk about what is available through Cornerstone Financial, because cornerstonereport.com will give you, of course, we have the older version, but then you have all these new reports. So if people say, wait a minute, I want to get some of this reports, or I want you to look at my portfolio and give me some analysis, you can do that.
Well, the other thing, too, is there's a lot of writing. We have a staff writer that puts articles, conservative articles. Right now he's putting mostly bullet points on here's what we talked about last week. But you can listen to our radio show as well, which is once a week on Saturday. Just click on the link on there and just go through it. It's usually tape delayed by 3 or 4 days because the compliance department has to look at it before they rebroadcast it. But it's much more in depth on the market and the economy. So it's high level market and economy type stuff, and it's very well received in the Dallas area. I'll put it that way. But that's something they can get from the CornerstoneReport.com website.
And I might just mention again, if people want to get a copy of your book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond,
right?
If they want to know about the radio program, if they want to schedule an appointment, they want to get your newsletter, all of it available at Cornerstone Report. So you've been very gracious to stay here a little bit longer.
Thank you, Kerby.
And let's do it again, because I got a feeling that there's a few more bumps in the road before we get to all of that. And I knew we wanted to get you on, if for no other reason, people trying to figure out what's going on with the stock market. So your market update would be something people might want to get.
Yes, and the market update should be available on the web. We do ask people for their email addresses. Simply, we don't share their email address with anyone. We're prohibited by law. We wouldn't do it from an integrity standpoint anyway. But it does give us contact, and we'll be sending them special reports as I publish them.
Well, thank you for staying here just a few extra minutes. So we'll take a break, and we'll come back. We'll talk about the shutdown. We'll talk about the wall, and all this is affecting finances as well. So we'll get into that. And if you have some comments or questions, really encourage you to do so. And always great to have Jerry Tuma in studio. As I said before, past performance is no indicator of the future, but you do sleep a lot better when you see that he's been able to predict so many of those downturns in the past. And I think he's predicting another one in the future. So we'll find out. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What if Christians and Christian institutions that provide so many social services went on strike? That is a question that Addison Del Mastro asked in The American Conservative. He reminds us of the book by Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. She proposes the question of what would happen if entrepreneurs in America decided to go on strike because of an increasingly overbearing regulatory state. The book documents the dystopia the country falls into. While I doubt that Christians and Christian groups will ever go on strike, it is a great thought experiment. Addison De Mastro explains that many of the services Americans take for granted are provided by churches and Christian organizations. One example is healthcare. John Stonestreet, in his Breakpoint commentary, wrote, "No Christianity, no hospitals. Don't take Christian contributions for granted." Catholic, Baptist, and Methodist hospitals can be found all over the country. He documented that in at least 30 communities, the Catholic hospital is the only hospital within a 35-mile radius. Education is another area where Christian involvement has been key. Christians run thousands of private schools that usually meet or exceed the quality of the public schools. The Catholic Church or various Protestant denominations or churches run more than 7 in 10 of the private schools in America. Churches also minister to the needy and marginalized in society. There are soup kitchens and outreaches to the poor and homeless. Churches also provide meals for the homebound. They provide marriage counseling as well as psychological counseling. Christian organizations place children in foster care and adoption, and Christian groups run pregnancy resource centers. You know, Christians aren't going on strike, but if they did, America would be a very different place indeed. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's, if we can, get into some of the issues in the news. And one of those is that this is, as we mentioned before, the longest shutdown in the history of this country, of the federal government, and however you want to say that. And it's starting to show some strains in a couple of key issues. One of those is the first article I've posted, TSA and the shutdown. The number of airport security screeners showing up for work has increased dramatically. According to the TSA, the national absence rate is now at 7.6%, compared with 3.2% on a comparable day just a year ago. And for our listeners in Georgia, or for anybody flying through the Atlanta airport, the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is the world's busiest airport, and they found that some passengers waited more than an hour to get through their checkpoints. Now, this has caused a number of carriers, probably the dominant carrier, of course, in Atlanta is Delta. They were now advising passengers to get to the airport at least 2 hours before a domestic flight and 3 hours before international flights. So that, I think, illustrates the case. Now, that being said, I will, in just a minute, read what TSA has been saying and arguing that in most cases that is not the case. For example, TSA said that when they looked nationwide, 1.9 million people on Sunday, that 99.1% waited less than 30 minutes. 93% waited less than 15 minutes. And so, again, maybe that wasn't necessarily nationwide, but it certainly showed up in Atlanta, the busiest airport in the world. Let's take another one in Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport. A security checkpoint and ticket counter there was actually shut down in Terminal B and will remain closed even to this day. And then let's see if we can jump to the Miami International Airport. It closed one of its concourses for part of Saturday and Sunday and shifted some of the afternoon and evening flights to some of the other concourses. So this is getting to be a bit of an issue, not only in airport security, but in a variety of other areas. We, in a sense, are headed towards uncharted territory. We have never seen a shutdown that has lasted this long. You can understand maybe why some people at the TSA have said, look, I still need to pay my rent. I still need to pay my car payment. I still need to pay my mortgage. I still need to get food on the table. And even if I can go and work at Uber or Lyft or something, I will at least have some income. Now, again, the argument is, and we've always made this, that after this shutdown is over, they'll receive their paychecks. But that doesn't help me in the near term, especially in light of what we were just talking about with Jerry Tuma just a minute ago, that almost a majority of Americans say, I could not come up with $400 unexpectedly. And so if I'm living paycheck to paycheck, even as a government employee, this is getting fairly difficult. So we'll see whether or not some of this very significant trauma will begin to bring some pressure on both sides to get together. But I thought one of the other articles that I would point to, in addition to this first one on the TSA and the shutdown, is the second article, which I've posted by Dennis Prager, in which he points out that this issue of the wall and the arguments being used against it really don't seem to work together. And so in some respects, what he does is, first of all, deal with the three reasons why there's opposition to building a wall on our southern border, then ask some other questions about other people that have believed some things that probably aren't true, and then comes back and tries to respond to those. So let me cover it real quickly. He says Democrats and others on the left offer three reasons for their opposition to building a wall on America's southern border. Number one, the wall is ineffective. Number two, the wall is too expensive. Number three, the wall is immoral. He says each one is false, so false as to constitute lies. So the question he has is, do Democrats and others on the left believe these lies? And he said this is a question that's really plagued him for some time. Before he comes back and responds to those, he talks about a series of other questions, 5 other questions that have always sort of been on his mind. One of those was, did my left-wing professors at Columbia University really believe the United States and the Soviet Union were equally responsible for the Cold War? Now, I recognize that goes back for many of our older listeners. Some of our younger listeners weren't around when that was the case. But again, Dennis Prager says, do they really believe that one of the most genocidal regimes in a history of the world, which butchered tens of millions of its own people, starved as many as 4 million Ukrainians, enslaved 7 Eastern European countries under totalitarian rule, and created the North Korean communist regime, was no more responsible for the Cold War than the United States, the freest country in human history? A second question he had is, did my left-wing professors really believe that men and women are the same except for body parts? And he goes into some things which we won't get into because it requires using some words that we don't necessarily need to have children listen to this broadcast to hear. Number 3, he said, do leftists really believe American universities constitute rape cultures? And he said, if so, why does any left-wing parent send his or her child to college? Would you send your daughter to a place you believe was permeated by rape? The fourth question was, do leftists really believe that the statement, there is only one race, the human race, is a racist statement? That, of course, is the official position in the University of California. And the final one, do leftists really believe that virtually every criticism of former President Barack Obama emanated from racism, and that any attack on George Soros is anti-Semitic? And the point he's making is on the next page, that leftists believe, if leftists believe any of those things, let alone all of them, they're deluded people. The existence of tens of millions of deluded people in a society can only portend catastrophe. And he says if leftists do not believe those claims, they are not deluded, but they are lying for effect and therefore engaged in evil. And he said the existence of tens of millions of people consciously committed to lying means society has little hope. So do they believe it, and thus we think they're deluded, or do they not believe it and just lie, and then are individuals that, again, are not necessarily honest about the conversation that is taking place? Which brings him back to, of course, the arguments about the wall. First of all, he says, do leftists believe the country cannot afford $5.7 billion? As the Democrats have approved $1.3 billion for border security, the difference is about 0.1% of the U.S. federal spending, because government this year will spend more than almost $4.5 trillion. He says Democrats and the rest of the left make this argument, yet they are the very people who, for more than half a century, have successfully pushed for unprecedented expansion of government spending. And then for our listeners out in California, I love the illustration he uses, because California, which has a Democrat majority in the Assembly and in the House, which is the House, and then the Senate, and also, of course, a newly elected Democrat governor, they have allocated $77 billion to pay for a high-speed train between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It will probably more likely cost $100 billion, and it won't be ready until 2033. And so, again, we are talking about this in a state that has an estimated $2 trillion in debt between its debt and its pension functions. So the first one is too expensive? Seriously? $5 billion compared to $77 billion just for a high-speed train? How about being ineffective? Well, again, we know that's not the case because we've had individuals voting for that in the past, as we've talked about. And he points out that do they really believe that Turkey's just-built 500-mile wall across nearly its entire border with Syria will be ineffective? What about the barrier that we talked about on this program between Hungary and Serbia and Croatia? Also, the borders in India and Pakistan. You give all sorts of examples, not to mention, of course, Israel's border and barrier, which has ended Palestinian terrorism. And then the final one, is there a Democrat or leftist who regards walls or other physical barriers surrounding homes or communities as immoral? He says one doubts it. For one thing, many of them live behind a physical barrier. So then why isn't a physical barrier that protects America equally moral? And so, again, he raises some very good questions. Are these arguments that are truly believed, and then we have individuals that are deluded, or are these arguments put out that aren't believed and is simply an attempt to try to change the discussion from the real issue that needs to be addressed? So those two articles on the website, pointofview.net. When we come back, we'll get into a couple of the other issues, not the least of which is FBI investigation and even religious tests that are being proposed primarily by some of the senators from California and Hawaii for those individuals that have their Christian convictions but would want to be actually appointed and nominated and confirmed to some of the judicial appointments. So we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Next couple of minutes, I'm going to focus our time and attention on California for a couple of reasons. First of all, we have two senators in California that have wanted to apply a religious test, and I might also add a senator from Hawaii has wanted to do the same. And then I haven't mentioned much about this today, but it's worth talking about for just a few minutes, the strike that has taken place in Los Angeles. I believe, isn't that the largest teachers union in the country? 33,000 teachers on strike Monday, on strike today. I don't see the resolution of that strike any faster than the resolution of the shutdown at the federal government. But let's take both of those issues, and then before the hour is up, also want to address this issue of the FBI investigation of the president. Of course, the other day you may have seen the New York Times had counterintelligence investigators had to consider whether the president's own actions constituted a possible threat to national security. And as hard as it is to take some of this seriously, was Donald Trump really a Russian agent? So we'll get into that in just a minute. But let's real quickly go to the third article I've posted here today. It's written by our good friend Lathan Watts, who's joined us many times on our Friday roundtable. He's, of course, with First Liberty. And the title of it is Democrat Senators Are Getting Way Too Comfortable with Religious Tests. And so he says that the new year will reveal whether or not some Democrats in Washington have resolved to abandon their overused, and he also adds, unconstitutional religious tests for office. And that is, you've had two Democrats in the Senate, Senator Mazie Hirono in Hawaii and Kamala Harris of California, recently objected to the nomination of one individual to the U.S. District Court in Nebraska based upon his membership in, you ready for this, the Knights of Columbus, which is, of course, a Catholic fraternal organization. Now, their objections sort of paralleled, if you will, some of the earlier objections that came from Senator Dianne Feinstein, also from California, in which she was challenging Judge Amy Coney Barrett about her kind of Catholic dogmatism. And, of course, there are other Democrat senators that have voiced some of those questions as well. And so, according to Senator Hirono from Hawaii, these, quote, extreme positions should require Mr. Boucher, Brian Boucher, to recuse himself from any further case. And, of course, then there were some other challenges as to whether or not they could even be objective. Now, first of all, you got to recognize that a majority of the people on the Supreme Court are Catholic. I don't know this for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if a majority of those in the circuit courts and the district courts are Catholic as well. But here's the issue. If you're Catholic, but you don't necessarily accept all of the teachings of the Catholic Church, no harm, no foul, because we know where some of the liberal Catholics on the Supreme Court stand on those issues. But if you do take them seriously, well, then that becomes the issue. So Lathan Watts goes on to say that Catholics, Protestants, and others without any religious affiliation recoiled at the sight of a U.S. Senator, in this case, Dianne Feinstein, questioning a nominee's fitness to serve based upon the, quote, dogma of a particular religion. In spite of what some people view as Feinstein's violation of Article 6 of the Constitution, Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed by the full Senate, and including 3 Democrats who also voted along with the Republicans in that case. But that didn't serve as much of a reminder because now you have, of course, the comments and the questions being raised by Senator Hirono and Senator Harris. And, of course, we've had some others, Cory Booker and a variety of others, Bernie Sanders. You can go down the list. It isn't just Catholics, but those were the ones that I'm focusing on just a minute. But I think Lathan Watts really raises a very good question. He says it's debatable whether a devout Catholic like John F. Kennedy would be welcome in today's Democratic Party. He says one very similar devout Catholic, that would be Representative Dan Lipinski, who's a Democrat from Illinois, holds strongly to his church's teaching on abortion, and as a result has found himself pushed to the fringes of his own party on the issue. And so he goes on and he talks about some of the things that have happened, not only to, of course, Barrett and Bush, but also Brett Kavanaugh and all of the rest. But his closing comments I thought were really helpful. He says, for over 200 years, the Constitution has stood as a bulwark against government intrusion into religious matters. Jurists who strictly adhere to the text of the Constitution and the proper role of the judiciary essential to the preservation of our liberty. This, in turn, places an enormous responsibility on the President and the Senate when it comes to filling judicial vacancies. And evaluating a nominee should include a number of closely scrutinized qualifications, but religion isn't one of them. And again, there's almost a religious test which is prohibited in Article 6 of the Constitution, but it seems to be surfacing time and time again. So this very good article written by our friend Lathan Watts is the third article we've posted on the website. While I'm talking about California, I didn't want to ignore the fact that we have the largest teachers union in the country, 33,000 teachers on strike. And interestingly enough, the United Teachers president actually said, here we are on a rainy day in the richest country in the world, in the richest state in the country, in a state as blue as it can be, in a city rife with millionaires where teachers have to go on strike. Now, let's give you some of the facts here real quickly. Los Angeles teachers earn on an average, according to this editorial in the Wall Street Journal, $75,000 per year. That's an average, so some are above, some are below. About $6,000 less than the statewide average. So if you think $75,000 a year is pretty good, the average for the state is actually essentially $81,000 a year. And then by the time you add in the compensation, that would be health and retirement benefits, it exceeds $110,000 per teacher. So that, of course, is one of those issues. So you can see why the state is saying, wait a minute, $110,000 for every teacher we put in the classroom or every administrator overseeing that. And that's the average, by the way. That's a lot of money. But on the other hand, you can see why the teachers are starting to complain, because they're saying we're getting less than people in other parts of the state, in Palo Alto, Sacramento, Stockton, wherever that might be up in San Rafael, wherever it is, okay? And so that's going to be an issue. But then in Los Angeles, there are difficulty right now in retaining teachers because, indeed, the cost of housing is an issue. Also, more and more money that could be going to increase teachers' salaries is going to what? Benefits and pensions, which are by and large, by the way, underfunded, to put it mildly. And so there are some other issues as well, because then you have all the health benefits, which, again, this article says about 15% of the $16,000 a year, which the district is supposed to spend per pupil, is going to the health benefits. So, again, spending $16,000 per student in the classroom, $110,000 essentially for the teacher, you can see how expensive education has become in the state of California. And then, of course, you also have incredibly good benefits. Again, no slight against those of you that are teachers, but most of the time you do get the summers off. I recognize sometimes you go work another job. Sometimes you go to graduate school, but that's the first issue. Then teachers can retire as early as age 55. They don't have to pay a dime for health insurance until they qualify for Medicare, which, of course, would be 10 years later. And then when they receive Medicare, they also receive subsidized supplemental coverage to help them at that late rate as well. And so you have some just significant challenges, because now nearly all the California school districts are being squeezed by the higher pension payments that the state legislature has mandated to try to shore up the Cal State teachers' retirement system. And so as a result, more and more school districts across the Golden State are just trying to scrounge up any kind of income just to keep the lights on. So the conclusion I would make, which I think is a warning to those of you listening on this program in other states, is you don't want to head down this road. And I thought it was interesting because the superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District had a great comment. Austin Butner said, schools can't spend money they don't have. You think? And again, when you spend more and more and more money and you have more and more generous benefits, eventually you just simply run out of money. And this is why you have a very significant teachers' strike right now. So in addition to a shutdown of 1/4 of the federal government, we have a shutdown now of the schools in Los Angeles. Let's take a break, though. I know some of you also would like to get some comments from me about this so-called FBI investigation. I've saved that for the end. But I'll also take some of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Take a break, take some calls, and try to summarize a few very important points right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ed McDaniels was a local pastor in Upshur County, West Virginia. One day he asked the local school superintendent if he could place Bibles on a table in the local public school. He didn't want to hand students anything. He just wanted to set out the material as a resource the students could take if they wanted to. The school had a policy of allowing the local Little League, Boy and Girl Scouts, 4-H Club, and other community organizations to set their materials on a table. Students passing by could take the material or simply ignore it. In a separate policy, the school prevented the distribution of religious and political materials. Local residents sued the school system, claiming that the policy preventing distribution of religious materials also denied McDaniels access to the community information table. Eventually, the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit determined that distributing meant physically handing out materials. In fact, the court explained that if the school kept the Bibles off of the community information table, it would breach its duty of religious neutrality and, in the words of the court, evince the hostility toward religious speech that the Establishment Clause does not require and that the free exercise and free speech clauses forbid. So look around at your school. Perhaps there's a community information table waiting to be stocked with Bibles. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention as a program note that tomorrow we're going to have our weekend edition. Well, actually, we'll have our Millennial Roundtable. Friday will be our weekend edition, but then also going to have David Allen and Hal Haubecker in studio with us. And then Stephen Baldwin, the actor, will be with us in the third hour. We'll be talking about his new film, The Least of These. So just a little bit of a program note for tomorrow. And that's one of the reasons why I thought for just a minute I might talk a little bit about this FBI issue, and then we'll take some phone calls because other people have been talking about it. And I guess we do need to mention it. And that is the New York Times the other day had this statement that counterintelligence investigators had to consider whether the president's own actions actually constituted a possible threat to national security. And so, again, some have said, well, do we really think that Donald Trump was a Russian agent? But again, it's back to the whole issue that the FBI took upon itself to determine whether the president is a threat to national security. And so, quoting from the Rich Lowry piece that we've posted, it is the fourth article there that you can read in its entirety. But according at least to the Times report, the FBI began to be somewhat suspicious of Donald Trump because, number one, during the campaign, he urged the Russians to hack Hillary Clinton's emails. Well, first of all, that I'm pretty sure all of us heard before. It was a joke. You know, hey, anybody out there that happened to have Hillary's deleted emails, you might want to let the media know. I mean, it was just a joke. But if indeed the FBI really thought that was serious, we got a real problem here, because I think almost all of us knew that it was a joke. Number two, the argument that they, in this Times article, was that the Republican platform allegedly softened towards Russia. And I love what this particular article by Rich Lowry says, and that is, never mind that, as Byron York of the Washington Examiner has demonstrated, this didn't actually happen. So that was false. And then some were disturbed by the fact that Donald Trump sometimes would praise Vladimir Putin. And again, I will acknowledge that Rich Lowry is hardly a fan of Donald Trump, but he said these comments were blameworthy, but they're not a federal offense. But that was enough to justify this kind of covert investigation of first candidate Donald Trump and then President Donald Trump. And so Andrew McCarthy has written about this and dissected the Times article, but our good friend Gary Bauer kind of summarized it in a couple of bullet points. And so in order to finish on time, let me just read the bullet points so that you can kind of see how to think this through. Point number one, the FBI had the Steele dossier. That's the one that had all sorts of unbelievable statements about Donald Trump. But anyway, the FBI had the Steele dossier back in 2016, and they believed it. It came to the Bureau from multiple sources, Christopher Steele, Bruce Orr, even Senator John McCain. Number two, there were plenty of reasons to be skeptical of the dossier. Steele's intelligence had been suspect in the past. It was paid for by the Clinton campaign, and he was eventually fired for leaking the story to the press. Number three, yet even though James Comey admitted that the dossier was never fully verified, the FBI used it to obtain a FISA warrant to monitor Carter Page. So, as he points out, the investigation was corrupt from the very beginning. So that leads to point number four, as Andrew McCarthy points out, the real target by the FBI, I should say, through the FISA warrants was not Carter Page, but Donald Trump. After all, the dossier wasn't about Page, it was about Trump, and the FBI would never pursue the FBI warrant through the FISA unless they believed some of the allegations of Donald Trump and some idea that he might have been colluding with the Russians. Point number five, but again, James Comey and others understood just how unprecedented and controversial an FBI investigation would be of the opposition party's presidential candidate, so it deceived the FISA court about the true nature and target of the investigation, saying that the dossier had been verified when it had not, and requested warrants for campaign aides, but not the candidate himself, which of course would be Donald Trump. Well, then that leads to the sixth point. Throughout the entire investigation in Operation 2016, the FBI worked on the assumption that Donald Trump was going to lose. And so, President Hillary Clinton would just sweep that under the rug. But Donald Trump won. And this meant the Bureau had an even bigger problem, because now the incoming president, Donald Trump, of the United States, would soon learn the FBI had been targeting him all along, and he would want to clean house at the FBI and the Justice Department, which leads to our next point. So the Bureau continued to dissemble that this was really just a counterintelligence campaign to figure out how the Russians had meddled in the election. Yet there were continued strategic leaks to the media suggesting collusion with the Trump campaign and by extension to the president himself, leading to the final 2 points. when the president eventually decided that it was time to clean house by firing James Comey, which he did, then the deep state allies of the fired former director decided to strike back. How did they do so? Triggering the appointment of special counsel Robert Mueller on the false grounds that Comey's dismissal constituted obstruction of justice. And then, as he points out in the final point here, Gary Bauer, quoting from Andrew McCarthy, remember that during this time between the firing of James Comey and the appointment of Robert Mueller, you have Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe had discussed wearing a wire to secretly record the president and invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president. And that gives you a brief summary of some of that. Some of that, but very little of it, appeared in the New York Times. The rest of it I quoted from the Andrew McCarthy evaluation, some of the material that's in Gary Bauer's piece. And so, again, that's where we are on that FBI investigation. But if you'd like to read some more about it, it is the 4th article we have posted today on the website, pointofview.net. Just before we take a break, let me, if I can, get one quick phone call here. Chris in California. Chris, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
For the person before, so I apologize. I had a financial question.
Okay, what might it be? I might not be able to answer, but I'll give you a chance. Yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So he was talking about having a 401k and most people not being able to save $400, to do things for their family. Well, I save 10% a week. And I was just curious. My wife really wants me to start a 401k through my work that matches up to 5%. And I was wondering I'm 41 years old. Is it a little late to do that?
Nope. It's never too late to start saving. As a matter of fact, there's some benefits. Number one, as you're starting now, you still will build up a fairly significant asset. I don't know enough about your company since we're coming to a break, but I'll assume that the example we used is maybe you put 5% in and they match it by 5%, 3%, whatever. So first of all, it forces you to save. Second of all, it increases, and I think it's just a great time, and there is never too late to save. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of people that are in their 60s right now hearing you ask that question and say, yeah, I wish back when I was in my 40s I was saving because I'd be a lot better off right now. So that's the quick answer. But if you wanted more information, let me again mention that we do have a link to Cornerstone Financial Services, and they're really very nice people over there, and Jerry is as well. So, ask them a question or two, and they'll give you a little bit more information. But I'm out of time, and we certainly have a lot more we can talk about. Maybe we will do that tomorrow right here on Point of View. We're certainly going to spend some time with our Millennial Roundtable, but then we have a couple of in-studio guests that you're going to enjoy as well. So I hope you'll join us every single day. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Visit the website, pointofview.net, and we'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called Medishare, and Medishare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, Medishare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with Medishare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join Medishare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.